Hey, did you know that over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but haven't subscribed yet? If you enjoy these true trucker horror stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It's free and really motivates us to keep the stories rolling. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's stories. Welcome to the Sleep Haunt, where truth and terror share the same road. Tonight, we bring you 7 true most haunting trucker horror stories, tales from endless miles, deserted rest stops, and nights where something unseen followed close behind. Before we begin, we've set a goal. Let's reach 100 likes on this video. And share your city and the time you're listening in the comments. Let's see who's out there riding the night with us. Now, settle in, breathe slow, and listen. The road remembers everything. Story number 1. Mason Hale knew the stretch they called the Silver Ribbon, as if he had traced it on the inside of his eyelids. After 20 years in a cab, a person learned the shapes of empty counties and the voice of night wind across sage. He rolled west under a clean sky, rig steady, a refrigerated trailer humming a steady white noise behind him. The desert was one long, even breath. His headlights combed the asphalt. Beyond them, the world fell quiet and endless, as if the planet were pausing while he passed. It was deep night, the hour that drew shadows closer. The dash lights cast a calm green, and the radio was down to a polite murmur. Off to his left, a seam of brightness rose and fell where a dry lake caught starlight like a mirror. He checked mirrors, checked gauges, kept a gentle hand on the wheel. The road wrote a line through emptiness. The first oddness was small, a mile marker repeating itself. He saw 332, then 333, then 333 again. He blinked, counted the reflective tick of posts, watched another sign go by like a slow thought. 334. A moment later, 333. He told himself it was fatigue. The hour tugged at focus, made shapes out of nothing. He breathed, took a sip of water from a bottle cool as the night air, and let the engine carry him forward. The CB was off. He'd turned it down miles ago to keep the cab quiet. Still, something like a hum curled at the edges of hearing, a thread of sound that didn't belong to engine or wind. It rose and fell as if spaced by time, not by road. He reached out to check the dial anyway, thumb tracing old scratches, and found the switch firm in the off position. He listened. The hum slipped away. At 2:11 by the dash clock, the desert gave him a turnout, a simple gravel fan, a single pole lamp buzzing above it. He signaled out of habit and slid the rig onto the crunching shoulder, engine idling low. The night was a living thing out here, not empty at all. It had smells and textures, a taste of dust and something green, the sharp bite of cold. The pole lamp flickered across its own moth cloud, and those small wings made a faint paper sound that set his skin prickling in spite of the heater. He checked his straps, checked his tires, watched his own breath faint the glass when he leaned toward it. He was fine. The rig was fine. He sat back and let his shoulders rest. Eyes on the lamp. It flickered again. The pattern arrived like breath, 3 quick pulses, a long pause, 2, then again. Then once, a pause, then 3. Not random, his bones decided, and that notion made it worse. He opened the glove box and closed it again for no reason at all. His phone had no bars. He wasn't surprised. The desert kept its own counsel. He set a short break timer on his watch anyway, and let the engine click lower. Sleep came fast and light. The dream that followed was simple enough. A neat white line under a soft blue sky, and on the shoulder every so often a cool blue rectangle with a white lid, an ordinary cooler. In the dream, as the truck drifted near, a hand rose from behind one, quiet as a wave. Mason woke fast with heart steady, and the strange comfort of a sky that had not existed a moment earlier still on his tongue. His watch told him he'd slept 20 minutes. The dash clock disagreed and claimed 42. Out the windshield, the pole lamp held steady now, a coin of sodium light against black. His breath fogged the glass and faded. He checked his mirrors and eased back onto the Silver Ribbon. The hum came back a few miles later. Mason tapped the CB switch, more to feel the click than from any need to talk, and left it off again. The sound had the quality of someone singing without opening a mouth, a tune that refused to resolve. He turned up the radio weather and a distant voice talking about a high-pressure system settling over the basin, and the hum simply braided itself through other noise like a thread. At 2:59 by one clock and some unhelpful hour by the other, he saw taillights ahead. They were far off. 2 gentle dots he could pace for a while. The ribbon had a way of making a driver happy for any company, even if that company was a pair of lights a quarter mile ahead. He held steady. The lights didn't grow or fade. That was fine. He hadn't meant to catch anyone. Half a minute passed. He glanced down at the speed, up at the road, and into his mirror. The taillights were there too, behind him by the same calm distance. He had a brief, unreasonable picture of the ribbon folding like paper, bringing its lines together to reflect light into places light shouldn't be, and then he told himself it was glass and fatigue and moved his focus forward. When the sign arrived, it looked new. Detour in clean black font on a bright orange field. An arrow pointed right toward a narrow county road he'd barely have noticed. A smaller placard below said 6B with fresh reflective tape. His GPS agreed and shifted its route without hesitation, speaking in a crisp voice that always made him think of a librarian. Roadwork ahead. Safer. To take the county lane. He signaled and eased the rig onto the thin black path that peeled away like a ribbon's loose end. The new road felt older, tired under the tires, but it was passable. Weeds brushed the vanishing strip of gravel shoulder. Low fences stuttered through the dark, like faint scribbles. The ribbon itself shone pale to his left, not far but not reachable through a wide flat of scrub and rock. Mason kept the rig centered and let the route do what it would. County 6B climbed, dipped, turned like a thought he couldn't quite finish. He passed a small building, a closed way station maybe, no signs, windows dark, and the silhouette of a dog or coyote stood frozen near a concrete step before sliding away without hurry. The detour signs continued, sure of themselves in fresh, bright paint. He found a rhythm in their comfort, followed arrows, breathed with the steady thrum of the reefer unit behind him. The first time he saw the barrier, it was nothing. A 2-foot concrete guard, sprayed with faint graffiti and a thin hand. Stay cool in wavering blue. He smiled at the gentleness of it. Miles later, it passed him again. Stay cool on the concrete, blue as breath on glass. There might be a lot of barriers here, he thought, or the same kid had made a project of this road. He glanced at the trip odometer, not meaning to. It rolled from 0.8 to 0.9. He hadn't hit reset. He never hit reset. He watched the number touch 1 and move on. Later, when the barrier showed again with the same strange kindness, the trip read 0.2, like a chalk mark wiped and redrawn. Fatigue, he told himself. A road that fit 2 lines of travel and spun them into each other. Signs reused at multiple turnoffs. The desert liked repetition. The mind did strange things with it. He turned the radio louder. The weather voice was replaced by a late-night station that sounded like it had been threaded through an old bottle. The DJ's voice belonged to another year. Stay safe, night riders. If your road is the loneliest road, know that you're not alone out there. Mason tapped the face of his dash cam out of habit, a small ritual, as if to tell the truck there would be proof of whatever the night did. Around the next slow bend, he saw the shape from his dream. A rectangle on the shoulder, pale where any paint caught light. He slowed, careful not to bring the trailer too near the crumbly edge, and let his beams touch it. Bleached gravel, no cooler, just a dry patch, lighter than the rest, as if sun had tried to keep a memory intact. He told himself he had simply dreamed what he had already noticed. Some casual, half-seen thing pulled up into a full picture by a sleepy brain. He kept moving. The next mile marker read 333. He'd been here before. The hum at the edge of hearing aligned with the seams in the pavement, becoming something like tapping, like a code tapped on a metal lunchbox. He cut the radio entirely and let the cab fill with the simple, honest sounds of road. He counted the flicks of the hum without meaning to. 3. Pause. 3. 4. Then a long silence that let his heartbeat pass him on the left and race ahead on the dark road. He reached the next turnout before he expected it. Pole lamp. Moth cloud. Gravel like old bone. He pulled in and cut the engine. Silence in the desert is not a lack of sound. It is a full presence, a soft coat that settles on you. It has depth. Mason sat in it, and felt very small and very awake. The lamplight flickered again, and the pattern arrived. Not with machine regularity, but with the stubbornness of something trying to say something through a bad connection. 3, long pause. 1, long pause. 2. He kept his hands on his knees and didn't move. The dash cam's tiny status light blinked a metronome in the corner of his eye. He turned the key without starting the engine. Just enough to bring the screens to life. The image on the cam was mostly darkness and a moth field. Out toward the road, it held a low-resolution world of dark and lighter dark. He scrubbed back a minute and watched the empty shoulder appear. And then, flick flick, the suggestion of something low and square right where the gravel bleached. He scrubbed back further. There it was again, plain as the inside of a thought. A blue cooler with a white lid. He did not like it at all, and could not look away. He dragged the timeline forward to the current moment. The gravel was empty again. He went back. Cooler. Forward. Gravel. Frame by frame. Somewhere between his rig entering the turnout and the moths reorganizing their quiet dance, it vanished like a trick done with no hands. The adrenaline that came wasn't dramatic. No cold shock. No racing breath. Just a clear, flat place inside him that said this road was not behaving by rules he understood, and that meant he needed to pick a rule and follow it. He remembered an old driver 40 years in, a man who had taught him that when electronics started leading you in circles, you killed them and chose a landmark. Mountains don't lie, he'd said. Wind towers don't lie. Find something that isn't new. Out in the desert, far to the left, 3 red blinks beat slow against the stars. He hadn't noticed them before. Maybe because they were small and far. Wind turbines. He traced a line through scrub with his eyes and found the faintest, paler thread of road between his turnout and the ribbon beyond it. Not a road, maybe. A maintenance cut. A path someone had used to get a truck off soft shoulder when they were tired of waiting. He didn't like the idea of leaving the marked route. He liked it less that the marked route was making him a slow circle. He turned the key, let the engine come back like a big animal waking, and flipped every switch he could flip. GPS off. CB off. Radio off. The cab went honest and bare. He backed carefully out, let the rig nose find the ribbon again, and when the detour arrow told him right, he let it stand there by itself and carried on straight. The first 100 yards felt like a rules violation. The next 100 felt like relief. The ribbon rose in front of him in a clean curve. No weeds touching it, no newly hammered sign pointing him away. He half expected a barrier or flashlight or an angry construction supervisor to step out with a cone. No one did. The silver ribbon took him like a river takes a leaf. He glanced once left and watched the county road he'd just abandoned parallel him in darker ink. It peeled away at a low hill and was gone. The hum stopped, as if embarrassed to have been caught. The mile markers obediently added one at a time without repeating their lines. 335, 336, 337. The night relaxed around him and became mere night. He did not adjust any clocks. He left them arguing with each other. He drove. At dawn, the sky came up slow, over a low ruin of mountain, and the ribbon let him loose near a truck stop that had a neat line of bulbs like a diner in a movie. The lot had a few rigs in it, mostly older, paint jobs faded by Sunday. Inside, the coffee was late night strong in a morning pot, and the linoleum held a shine on its edges. A highway patrol cruiser sat outside with dust on the hood. The officer inside had the same sleep-soft eyes as everyone else, and a way of standing that told the room he didn't want trouble. "Detour still up on 50? A man at the counter asked nobody in particular. The officer answered in a patient voice. "No crew out there. We told them to pull the signs last month. Flood's long past. If you see it, it's just left over." Mason felt the room flex around that. A couple of heads tilted and were careful not to nod. A woman at a corner table glanced at the TV and didn't see it. The officer sipped coffee and let the idea settle. "We still get folks peel off. That back road looks official if you don't know the area. We find them turned around and cranky down by the old way station." He didn't add the things he wouldn't say in a bright place. Mason bought a new bottle of water even though he wasn't thirsty and carried his mug back out to the rig. The wind turbines were visible in daylight as small white needles on far hills. He felt a dull gratitude for them that had nothing to do with anything practical. Back in the cab, he set the dash cam to review and watched the night peel back. The cooler appeared again, small and blue, like a child's drawing. The frame around it shivered as if the camera wanted to focus and could not. The timestamp hiccuped and flashed a date from a month earlier, then returned to the present. He let the clip play to the end where a moth crossed the lens like a hand closing over an eye. On the truck stop's corkboard near the door, a paper hung under a thumbtack. It was sun-faded, around the raised grains of the cork, the edges curling. In memory of Elliot Cooler Jones, it read in neat black, next to a picture of a man with a cap pulled low and a grin that reached his eyes. He left water at the old turnout every summer. Kept more than a few tourists out of trouble. Love the ribbon. Love to wave. If you pass through, stay cool. Someone had drawn a small blue rectangle by hand at the bottom corner, with a white lid and two parallel lines like straps. On his next run west, Mason put a cooler behind his seat. He didn't know why. He wasn't a superstitious man. He had done everything right. He had followed instructions, listened to machines, watched the road, and still found himself asking a lamp to please stop flickering in patterns. He stopped at the turnout at dusk and set the cooler on the bleached gravel where the white lid made its own small glow. Not a shrine, not even a gesture, just a thing a person did on a road that sometimes folded and whispered and asked you to remember small kindnesses. Back in the cab, he glanced at the mile marker. 333 rolled by cleanly. He let the hum of the engine settle in his bones and drove on. The silver ribbon untied itself ahead, and the desert, with a kind of quiet good humor, let him pass. Story number 2. Grace Mendoza preferred mountain nights. Plains work had its ease, long lanes and dim horizons. But the high country asked for attention and gave something back when a driver answered properly, engine in the right gear. Soft hands, steady plans. Her tractor wore a burgundy stripe that caught little of the starlight, and the trailer behind her carried palletized light fixtures, banded tidy, not too heavy, not too high. The air outside was cold enough to make the exhaust bloom and fall. Far off, a ridgeline made a darker edge against a sky with a thin frost of stars. She rolled east along a two-lane that threaded switchbacks and saddles, an old route that had been the backbone before the interstate cut a cleaner path down in the valley. That night the world felt emptied in a careful way. No snow, just a dry cold and a faint ribbon of creek to the right that flashed sometimes as if remembering daylight. The instrument panel glowed a low amber. The reefer unit was off for this trip and gave her a silence that was not quite silence, just the piano note of tires, the hush of wind, the caught breath before a downhill. An overhead board came into view around a bend. A box sign with its own little crown of frost announcing that the eastbound scales ahead were open. The lights were firm, not flicker. The word neat, not tired. Grace frowned without changing her expression and felt her foot do a slow, automatic lift. She knew this station. Pine Hollow scales had been hit or miss for as long as she'd run this route. After the bypass went in down south, the place was mostly dark. She hadn't seen that open in months. She could have stayed on the main lane. A lot of drivers sailed past at night when the valley was quiet, but the sign had the clean, official look of something that meant what it said, and there was a rightness in doing the right thing when the road asked. She signaled and followed the diamond pattern arrows across the gore point into the way lane. The tires changed tone as the surface ribbing took them. The cab felt a hair more hollow, as it always did when the shoulder rose and the world opened out to the side. The station itself sat in a shallow cup of the mountain, a long, low building with a peaked middle, windows along the front like dark stamps, a tall light pole standing guard at the entrance. The pavement paint looked fresh. The word scale was crisp, with no tire scrub making letters into ghosts of themselves. White lines guided her toward the platform, which gleamed a little with dew. Unit 223 eastbound. Bring it nice and slow, said a voice out of the speaker in the sign. She hadn't keyed a mic. The voice had a mild mountain accent, that softening of vowels that made everything sound like neighbor talk, and a clear, unhurried tone. Grace glanced at the call number. In habit, her unit wasn't 223 anymore, not since the company renumbered. The number painted small on her door was 706. She said nothing. She brought it nice and slow. The scale took her weight with a slight shiver that she could feel through the floor, just a hum of machinery settling to .0. Numbers chased themselves along a small digital board to her left steers. Drives, tandems, gross each figure, clicking still in a tidy order. There was nothing wrong, nothing at all unusual in the rows, except for how quietly it sounded be happened. No thumps in the floor, no truck grinding on the adjacent pad, no clatter of yard-locked dolly legs somewhere beyond. Just her. Just the little hum. Hold it there, the voice said. Appreciate you. The red light stayed steady. Grace breathed out and kept her hands comfortable on the wheel. Thumbs touching the rim, not pressing. The heater whispered. Out on the creek, something took a step and set a little ripple traveling downstream, catching the floodlight in a string of broken coins. The windows of the building were black squares. Your book, said the speaker after a beat. You're pretty as written. Bring it up to lane 2 for a quick look if you would. Lane 2 was the right-hand inspection bay. The arrow lit green above it, an everyday color that felt too bright in the mountain dark. Grace thought briefly about not liking the word quick in the context of mountain benches, then put the truck in gear and eased forward at walking speed. The roll-up door was half open. It lifted the rest of the way as she approached, making a chain sound, smooth but present, like a zipper drawn patiently. Inside, the light was soft and full, not hospital bright, but even across concrete that had more care than most. Yellow borders marked the path. Cones stood to one side as if someone had tidied them. No human stood in the bay. On the far wall, the frosted pane of an office showed nothing more than a square of glow like a moon trapped under glass. Stop there, said the speaker. The voice came from a small round grill set into the wall at driver's ear level. Grace stopped. She set the brake. She watched the mirrors where nothing moved but imagination. Neutral. Parking brake set? The voice said. Affirmative, she said, sounding like herself and like every night she had done something like this. The speaker clicked once in acknowledgement, a pleasant little habit of the old systems. Trailer valve released, the voice said, and she did that, reaching down, pushing the red knob back in. The rig settled the tiniest amount, a shift like an exhale. Kingpin looks true, the speaker said, and Grace almost smiled without meaning to. They couldn't see her kingpin from here, not unless there were cameras at angles she hadn't spotted, but her hookup was clean, and the called-out correctness felt like a checkmark on a list you held in your head. Something under the floor made a shallow growl, as if a belt had engaged. The platform eased. She felt the vibration through the pedals, not rough, just present. A board mounted ahead of her head height, lit up with bright dot matrix letters. Brakes. Good. Tires. Cool. Load. Secure. The last line sat there like a compliment. We're showing you a little more weight on your back left than is perfect, the voice continued, friendly as ever. Not a ticket, just a nudge. If you got a chance to slide one hole at the next wide, you'll like the feel better on the grade. Grace considered the advice. The pallets were light. A smidge of left bias on a mountain wasn't her favorite, but she could handle it. The idea that a station would notice that and prefer that she be happier for the descent had a sweetness to it that made something under her ribs ease. She nodded, and then reminded herself, nobody could see that nod. Copy, she said. Good, said the voice. Listen up for a moment more. You got Pine Grade in 3 miles. It's got that good double bend and that sad patch on the outside that the county keeps saying it'll fix. Take it in 4th and let your retarder set to 2. Keep it 43. There's a sedan on the shoulder just beyond the 65 sign. Driver's nervous. He'll open his door when he sees headlight because he thinks he should. You'll have him if you're steady. Grace didn't respond right away. The language, the way the mountain was described, as if it were an old cousin. The note about the patch, the exact speed. The door felt intimate in the oddest way. She felt no spike of alarm. The information sat in her mind like the way an old dog sits by a kitchen chair and waits to be spoken to. Familiar, attentive, not imposing. She waited for the "you're clear" part. It came on the tide of a small sigh through the speaker. You're clear, eastbound. Thanks for stopping. We appreciate folks who play by the good rules. Keep both hands on, eyes easy, and go on through. The roll-up door lifted again by another inch, as if to encourage her like a person might when holding an elevator for someone whose hands are full. She touched the dash one time without looking at it in a habit of respect, and eased back out of the bay, through the lane, around the gentle curve where the station rejoined the highway. The open board still shone steady. No other truck had appeared out of the dark. She merged. 3 miles later, Pine Grade arrived precisely the way old drivers described it at tables with napkin maps. There was the left wander, the right bite, the guardrail shiny from years of careful misses, the small pale scar where the outside patch never quite cured. Grace dropped to fourth, set the retarder to 2, and let the engine do the work. A deep quiet against gravity, 45 by the sign, 43 by the gentle feel. She saw the 55 rip into 65 sign ahead, its white rectangle pure in the beams, and there it was, red tail of a sedan pinched onto the shoulder, hazard triangles arranged bravely, door cracked an inch, a head turned toward the glow of her burgundy stripes like that glow might contain help. The door swung wider. She was already left, already quiet. She gave him room without drama. The man's hand lifted at the elbow, a reflex in the wrong place, and then fell. She cleared him with a soft breath between. The mountain held its breath with her and let it out as the grade flattened toward the next run of trees. When the road went wide enough and flat enough, she pulled into a turnout lined with clumps of dry grass and slid the tandems one hole forward like she'd been told. It was a small change, a tiny rebalancing, but the rig felt different under her hands, like a person who had shifted weight from foot to foot and found a comfortable stance. She stood in that steadiness for a second, then climbed back in, checked her mirrors, and rolled. The diner that worked the night off the other side of the ridge was a low place with 2 kinds of pie under domes and a cat that slept near the register. Grace took her coffee black because there was no point pretending it was anything else, and she listened to the radio in the corner talk about a game somewhere and a storm somewhere else. The talk at the counter gathered itself the way it always did, familiar gossip with an edge of shared weather. "You see the old scales up here lit tonight?" asked a plow driver with bright tape across his jacket. The hostess wiped and kept wiping like people do when they're thinking about whether this is worth saying out loud. "They ain't open," she said. "They can't be. State closed them a while ago, since the bypass." Plow jacket shrugged. "Board said open. I didn't stop. I got salt, not weight." A man at the far end, hair still tucked up under a knit cap, glanced toward Grace's vest and then away in polite caution. "Heard him on the radio last winter, telling folks to take it easy. Figure they got some old systems still working on their own." Grace thought of the speaker. She thought of the way the words had dragged no fear with them, but had arranged the next mile into something safer. She didn't say that she had been in lane 2. She didn't say anything at all. She drank her coffee and felt the warm travel into her fingers. On her dash, in the slot where scale tickets always ended up, she tucked the printout she'd gotten through a small stainless slot as she left the bay. It had come clean and narrow on thin paper, the kind that had gray on its edges from the dispenser, and it listed her weights in a font that made her think of early receipts in her mother's purse. At the top, where the station's name should have been, the line read, "Pine Hollow Port of Entry," in a serif that nobody had used in years. The date said 3/14, no year. When she touched the bottom corner to pull it square into the slot, a watermark that hadn't been visible under the bright lights in the bay came up in soft letters. "Thank you for complying." She drove the next months like anyone in the hills, weather making her choices one night and clear chill letting her choose the next. The station stayed dark each time she passed, even when she slowed in that half-hope, half-habit way a person gets when they've once been, and then, a fall night with the leaves not yet down, and a damp hanging that made headlights into soft balloons, the open lit again. This time, the approach had a different mood. One of the tall poles in the lot had a bulb out, and the light it should have cast left a triangle of space that seemed a notch darker than it needed to be. The paint on the arrows looked a little older, not dirty, just like time had leaned on them. The sign that usually said, "All Trucks Lane." One had a plastic cover taped over the bottom edge, so the text read, "All Trucks Lane" without its number. Grace went in anyway. It felt less like compliance, and more like visiting a house where you had once been fed and wanted to repay hospitality with polite presence. "Eastbound Unit 223, said the voice. "Welcome back." The tone had lost none of its ease. Inside the bay, the cones were upright. The frosted window again glowed, and again there was no shape moving against it to say anyone lived behind. When she stopped where she was told, the board ahead of her did not light with the simple declarations. It showed something else this time, a neat line of 7 squares that filled one by one in a calm pattern, and then cleared and did it again like a slow breath. "We ain't ticketin'," the speaker said. voicing the very thought she had not needed to think. Not our hours. Not our remit. We're just advising. We like to advise. You're fine as you are. Tonight, listen. At mile 50, 2, keep to your left until you can count 4 reflectors on your right. There's frost on the plate at the joint. It isn't pretty. Don't let it catch you. You've got a dry left you can ride. Copy, said Grace, steady. She had noticed the air bite at elevation, that wet cold that froze the thin places, the joints in the road, the places where metal met weather. She had not known which joint it would be. Now she did. Thank you. Thank you, the voice said back in the old way that made it sound like more than a reflex. We see you. That's all. She pulled out and met the road as if she were meeting it in a narrow doorway. The stretch to mile 52 was not long. The mountain helpfully marked things for the people who moved on it. Little blue tabs on the posts, small metal plates, reflectors screwed in like eyes. She let the tires hum and counted out loud without sound. 1, 2, 3, 4. The joint was a shadow, a nothing at first, just a line that didn't read like any other line. The plate there had a dull gray slick to it that wasn't rain. The right lane was a sheen. The left track held a bite. She was already in that track, already on the safe. A pickup on the right shoulder chewed the ice with its all-terrains for a moment, and then found itself pointed west when it had meant to be pointed east. It wasn't drama. It was a small lesson for someone who would tell the story later, with their own breath still in it. Grace rode her line and passed without changing anything important. The mountain, again, let her through. After that night, the scale house did what mountain things do. It was there, and not there. Open and not. Bright and not. A place and an absence. She went by in snow, watching for the green of the board and finding only darkness. She went by in moonlight and saw the whole concrete apron washed pale as bone. Twice more that winter, the open lit when only a handful of trucks were out. Twice more she rolled through, and twice the voice from the stainless grill had something kind and particular to offer. Watch for rock on the inside. Someone knocked the net loose. You'll catch fog by the dam. It sits low. Don't chase it. Let it be fog. In the spring, she stopped again at the diner with the pie domes and thanked the cat out of habit as it stepped a tail around her calf. The plow driver was there without his jacket, looking like a neighbor again. The hostess had a new hair clip in the shape of a little maple leaf. You know they finally took the guts out of Pine Hollow? The hostess said to the room more than to anyone. Guy from the state come up and pulled the brain out, said it was costing them to have it sit there lit sometimes. Lit sometimes, the plow driver repeated like a line from a song. Huh? Grace ate her pie and nodded and made the small talk that keeps rooms polite. She did not mention the stainless grill. She did not mention a slow voice that knew about a door opening. On her way out, she laid a buck on the corkboard under the edge of a flyer advertising a rummage sale, the way drivers sometimes did as a peculiar thank you to places that felt safe. Back in her truck, tucked into the visor, the scale ticket that said Pine Hollow had begun to fade. Where numbers had sat black and crisp, gray came in and washed them. When the light hit it at a certain angle, the thank you watermark showed as if it had just been printed. Sometimes when she looked at it, never while moving, always in a lot, always with her elbow on the armrest and a hand covering the wheel like you hold a sleeping child's shoulder, a different line of numbers would be there for a second, a weight that had nothing to do with the night at hand but everything to do with the one to come. She did not test the idea. She did not push at it. She let it be what it was. A year later, on a hot night with thunder walking somewhere far off and heat lightning stitching a lazy seam between two peaks, Grace ran the eastbound again and found the scale house dark in a way that carried finality. The open was dead. The little window had no glow. A new sign on the approach, bright white in the headlights, read permanently closed. It looked official and oddly affectionate. It made her think of someone who loved a place enough to make even the ending tidy. Still, when she rolled past the spot, her dash made a tick just once, a small sound that could have been plastic settling or a cicada knocking the glass. She tapped her finger on the steering wheel one time in answer. The tick did not come again. She let the mountain have the last word. From then on, when the grade rolled ahead and the creek kept its small voice at her right elbow and the ridges leaned their old familiarity around the bends, She took Pine Grade the way the voice had told her the first time, gear right, retarder at 243, eyes soft, hands calm. She watched for doors on shoulders. She watched for shine on joints. She watched for fog by the dam. She did not need a speaker in a wall to tell her she was seen to know that she was. The mountain held that knowing for her now, and the scale house, whether or not it ever lit again, lived in her habits like a song she might hum and never sing. The printed ticket slept in the visor, as if it were a small talisman. Its letters faded to the edge of nothing, its watermark coming back only when the sun rose thin and straight through the windshield. On those mornings, its words were clear, just long enough to read, and then gone, leaving only paper and a feeling that the road could also be a friend. Story number 3. Devin Knox liked the flat nights the way some people like a favorite song on low volume. The Great Plains ran out in all directions like a table with nothing on it, and the sky above was a vast, careful lid with far-off lightning playing a quiet game in its corners. His tractor's cluster glowed soft to keep his eyes relaxed. The reefer hummed in a steady way that felt like a companion. The highway ahead was a stripe of pale concrete, seams ticking under the tires at a measured tempo that let the mind drift and the hand stay sure. He kept the cab simple after midnight. Phone face down. CB off. Music off. The truck's own sounds were enough. The wind worried at the mirror arms in a small, ongoing way. The thermos of coffee had gone to the lukewarm stage where it tasted like memory. The next town was a handful of lights 30 miles ahead, a water tower and a grain elevator squared up like careful toys on a shelf. The first word came into the truck like a thought. Breaker. Not loud, not dramatic. A whisper with the structure of a radio call. He twitched in that small, private way, nothing moving except a tilt of attention, and glanced at the CB switch to confirm he hadn't bumped it. Off. He rubbed a knuckle under his eye, felt the grain of salt there from a long day, and looked back at the road. It happened again. Breaker 1 to 9. He clicked the CB on for a second, saw the channel sit dead and well-mannered, then clicked it back off. Sometimes the FM would bounce a transmission into a speaker if the wiring was having a mood. Sometimes the truck itself would carry a ghost of sound in its harness. He told himself a practical story and let it settle. At mile marker 214, the storm to the south threw a polite white flicker over the horizon. A line of low fencing on the right was black against the flash. A cattle gate hung open at a field road and swung a little on its hinge in the wind. The highway here had no wire to keep animals off, nothing to suggest the world and the road were separate. The grass bowed and then straightened. Eastbound reefer at 207, the voice said. Crisp now, its vowels shaped by the middle of the country. Ease down for the curve. The speaker in the dash was not on. The words didn't come from any obvious place. They came the way a song gets into your head when you haven't heard it in years and still know every line. Devin did what the road wanted anyway. He took a pound off the throttle and let the rig's weight remind him of what it meant to be careful. The curve ahead wasn't much, just a lazy bend around a drainage. In the center of it stood two big animals invisible until they flicked ears. They were dark and heavy and exactly the color of night. He had time because he had made time. He rolled by with the trailer inside the rumble line, his sidelights whispering a soft glow over hide and horn. The bigger one turned its head and watched him without hurry. He let breath return to his shoulders an inch at a time. Good, said the same voice, purely conversational. Appreciate you. Then it was gone. The town with the water tower arrived exactly when it should, and the single pump island of its all-night gas station threw a square of light that moths liked. Devin pulled in and killed the engine long enough to use the restroom and buy a coffee that tasted like a different kind of memory. Inside, the place had a bulletin board full of paper. A bake sale. An auction for a tractor. A flyer for a lost blue heeler from 3 summers ago. In the corner, pinned with an old thumbtack that had gone green, was a patch the size of a coaster. The circle was navy cloth, the stitching white. Night watch, it said around a simple radio tower. 19 inches the middle, and a tiny lightning bolt that looked like someone had added it by hand with a careful needle. The clerk rang him up and slid his change across the counter on the flat of one finger like a card dealer. You headed east? She asked, not to be nosy, just filling the friendly quiet. When he nodded, she tilted her head toward the window where the highway lived in a slice of glass. You might get fogged by the river if the heat let off out there. Sirens spooked my dog earlier. Tornado sirens? He said. The air outside didn't have the shape of a storm. Test, maybe, she said. Something wound them up. Or they wound themselves. She smiled. A person who lived under a big sky learned to be comfortable with little pieces of the world talking when there was nothing particular to say. Back on the road, the night went thinner, the way it does when dew thinks about forming. The lines at the edge of the highway softened. In the distance, a red warning light on a tall pole blinked at a steady interval like a heartbeat set by a metronome. Devon set his internal clock against it and let the pace help his eyes stay gentle. He passed one of the old call boxes that still dotted these stretches. Square blue sign, phone, in white, a shoulder cut wide with a slab, where a car could step out and speak to someone. Most of the boxes no longer had phones. The sign stayed because nobody had gotten around to taking them down. As he slipped by, the tiny yellow indicator on the box's face clicked on like a blink and held there for the seconds it took the truck to pass. It did not flicker again. "Devon," said the voice in the cab. It did not ask a question, it was a greeting. Hearing his name in a place where nobody could possibly be looking at him snapped a line somewhere deep. His hands did not leave the wheel. His eyes did not jump. The car behind him, far back, kept its place. "If you can hear me, tap your high beam once." He told himself it was a prank. He told himself the station back at the town had a scanner and a kid with too much time. Still, he touched the stalk and whispered the high beams at the dark. One crisp flick. The voice came immediately, warm in its odd way. "All right, eastbound. Thank you for that. Keep your right, then ease center for the next mile. There's a grader left out after the culvert. No flashers. You'll see the line it made in the dust." He went quiet inside. The advice had the flavor of things that could be checked. He kept his right, then eased a half lane toward the middle where the broken yellow lay. The culvert appeared under the road as a narrow guardrail with a change in sound. Beyond it, on the shoulder, a broad iron machine slept the way forgotten machines sleep, taller than it looked from a distance, with its blade nose down as if it had stopped mid-thought. No cones, no tape, just a shape. The dust had indeed a line in it. He passed it smoothly, then went back to his lane like a dancer, settling onto the beat after an improvisation. "You're doing fine," the voice said, which was such an ordinary thing to say that it rubbed some of the strangeness off. "We're going to be with you for a bit." It ended on a soft double click, the old etiquette of a handheld mic tapping off. "How are you doing that?" Devon asked aloud. He had no idea if speaking into open air mattered. He did it anyway. "My CB is off. Don't need your box," came the answer after a moment that felt like someone thinking. "Got plenty of wire in that truck, and the sky carries sound like gossip. You don't have to answer. We're neighbors." That's enough. He drove. He let the neat practice of control keep his breath where it belonged. The road ran straight for a long spell, then took a polite kink around a grove of trees that had held on in the middle of pasture. He passed another blue SIN-phone sign. Its small lamp woke as he came abreast of it, held its own little square of glow, and went dark as he moved away. He glanced in the mirror and saw the light wink out exactly when the reefer's hum reached a certain point in its cycle, as if the box and the machine behind him knew each other's timing. "Eastbound," the voice said, pleasant as a neighbor across a fence. "Couple notes. You'll have a four-way flash and a quarter-mile look for a van with its nose to the wrong side. They're flustered and thinking about backing onto the fast. Don't crowd. And the fog you were promised is leaning on the river. It's that low kind. Let it come to you. Don't chase it with your brights." "Copy," he said before he could stop himself. Old habits wore measured grooves, he added, because everything else tonight had been honest. "What do I call you?" "Night watch is fine," said the voice, not proud, not coy. "Or nothing at all." The van did sit ahead, its front end pointed at the crash fence, as if that were destination. A man stood with a phone at his ear, and a look that said he was explaining a mistake to someone who could not fix it. Devon took his space carefully, left room for a human who might not have instincts for trucks, and moved by without stirring a panic. The fog rose from the river like breath from a horse's nose in cold air. It was soft and beautiful until it was suddenly a wall. He made the change a meter at a time out of the far picture and into a private world of white and two lines and a strip of reflectors. He left his brights down and watched the edge. The world shrank to what he could hold. "This part's ours," Nightwatch said. "Click once if you're with me." He flashed a single confirmation at the gray. "You're going to feel a car tuck in behind. Don't give it your attention. Folks will pace you when the world gets small. At mile 230, there's a 3-stripe chevron on your right where the ditch opens. That's real. When you see it, stay on your left tire track and breathe through it. Do not stop between here and there. The shoulder looks hard. And isn't. We're with you. Keep your hands easy. Hear those reflectors? That's your metronome." The fog made a cathedral around the truck where sound had weight. The reflectors ticked in the hush of the white. His own heart found their rhythm and loosened. In the mirror, a light bloomed and set itself at the exact distance from his bumper that says someone is using you for a guide. It was neither too close nor a polite distance. It was the posture of a person who had no idea where else to put themselves. He let them be there. He imagined the driver's knuckles. He imagined the decision about a steering wheel made too tight. He moved through a world reduced to a paper hallway. Outside the cab, the fog made its own gentle shapes. It gathered near the ground and floated just above the ditch mouth, leaving the tops of fence posts in clear air like commas. A sign slid past as a gray block with darker gray on it. He did not bother to make it say words. Then the chevron lived up ahead, black and white and certain. 3 angled stripes pointing down, the whole plate wet with mist. He did what he'd been told as if he had always intended to do it. He kept his left tire on the left lane's good track. He balanced weight and sight and a small faith. The follower behind made a move as if to pass, thought better, then ghosted out of his mirror in a slow drift that meant a different decision entirely, maybe an exit, maybe a pull-off beyond the fog where their hands could stop aching. At the rest area after the river, he took the ramp up and let the truck breathe. The fog thinned at the top of the small hill and left him in a clearing of light under the lamps. The air smelled faintly of damp metal and mown grass. A vending machine rattled in a steady way inside the building, and someone had left a newspaper face down on a bench so that it looked like a person napping. He flexed his fingers, not because they were sore, but because he wanted to remind them what they were. In the alcove by the vending machines, an unmarked metal door stood with a padlock that had been painted over 3 times in 3 different shades of state gray. A thumb-high strip of masking tape on the door, half hidden by a different layer of paint, had writing on it in pencil. Night Watch Closette. The letters were faint. He could have missed them by not looking. Next to the door, a wire basket held pamphlets about road conditions and safe tire pressures. Buried under them, the corner of a green binder showed like a leaf. He picked up the binder because things that show their corners are asking to be held. The cover was the kind of vinyl that creases and never uncreases. Inside, the pages were hand-drawn and typed in alternation charts with mile markers and small notes. Calf loose at 171. Bridge crew left signage wrong, call Albie. Wind at 40 from south. High profile, keep it under 50. The dates ranged from years deep past to a summer that was not recent but not so long ago that the ink had faded. Initials marked each line like small signatures on a covenant. At the bottom of one page, in a tidy hand, someone had written, "If you find this, leave it. If you need us, click your lights once. We'll do what we can." He eased the binder back into the wire basket and set the pamphlets over it the way a person tucks a child into a comfortable sleep. He went outside and stood in the rest area's shallow bowl, listening to the semi who had parked 2 slots down let its fan cycle. The fog had layered itself in folds over the lot like sheets. Night Watch came back when he merged. "All right. Eastbound," the voice said. A little closer than before, as if the distance between transmitter and receiver had been shortened by an idea. "You passed yourself an exam. We got your back to the ridge, and then we'll let you go." At mile 241, right shoulder tilts down more than it looks. "Stay on. Don't cheat the stripe. There's a tractor with no lights at the crossroad. He'll wait. He doesn't know he will yet, but he will." Devin drove the way he always did, and also the way a person does when the night has declared itself as something with opinions. At the crossroad, the dark shape of a tractor waited where a field met the county blacktop. The driver turned his head as if to calculate a move, then sat his decision and let Devin have the main line. The whole moment was so ordinary that it felt like proof. "How do you know my name?" Devon asked. Quiet, eyes on the ripple of the road where heat of day had made it waver. I didn't give it. You told a scale house once, Nightwatch said in a soft tone like velvet folded twice. You told a truck stop on a loyalty card. You told the air when you checked old boxes. Names move in air the way cotton does. Don't worry on that. We don't say them unless there's a reason. And the reason, he said, we like to remind people they're not invisible. The answer sat between them like a small, polite dog. Roads big. Human beings are small. It's fine to feel small. It isn't fine to feel alone. They rode together a long while. The world did small, normal things. A train went its own parallel night a quarter-mile away and let its horn drift across fields like an animal calling to another. A deer stood 3 legs inside a fence and decided to be a statue. Far off, a set of sodium lights at a compost facility made a low dome of orange like a captured sunset. The highway shouldered the weight of tires and did not complain. At a turnout marked with a plain sign that said Scenic View, Devon pulled in because the voice said gently, let's take a minute. The sky was a little lighter there, not with dawn but with a broad, soft nothing that happens before any edge is visible. In the dim, the plaque by the rail that described river geology had been polished by years of hands. Someone had left a bottle of water on it with the cap half twisted, a quiet generosity for any person who came up the short ramp and realized, upon arriving, that they were thirstier than they had let themselves be. You can go without us from here, Nightwatch said finally. Fog breaks after the next low spot. The town's wake-up lights are coming on already. You'll see kitchen windows in a bit and a porch lamp that was left on all night by accident and won't know it yet. Keep your lane. Tap them brights if you want us to check in. And if we're out there, we will. Thank you, Devon said into the empty cab. He meant it in a way that didn't need any more words. He pulled back onto the highway and let the truck return to its business. The fog did loosen like cloth. The electricity of the storm to the south had gone to a low murmur and a far flicker, as if it too had gotten tired. In daylight, everything he had just passed wore a more obvious face. The grader at the culvert was merely a machine parked on a shoulder, a thing a crew would retrieve. The chevron was just signs and bolts. The blue phone signs were little memorials to a time when people had needed to stand in the wind to ask for help. A hawk sat on a bare tree and looked like it belonged there more than any of it. He fueled in a town where the grain elevator's paint had been bleached to a pale gray, and the cafe opened at 5 for the kind of people who would be hungry at 5. In the window of that cafe, next to a note about a pancake breakfast, a black and white photo hung without a frame. A dozen people stood in front of a radio tower, some with caps on, some with their hair in careful waves, some holding clipboards. Night Watch, someone had written by hand along the bottom. A woman at the center held a mic like a person holds something that is not their property but is entrusted to their care. The photo had no date. It didn't need one. For the rest of that day and for a long time after, Devon drove with the same clean habits he'd always had, and with a small new practice tucked in. When the world felt a notch too thin, or a fog sat wrong, or a turnoff looked a little more like a mistake than a choice, he would tap his high beams once before he made his move. Most nights, nothing answered. Some nights, a voice as gentle as the sound of a hand on a screen door would say, "We got you," and tell him something small and exactly right. He never rushed the exchange. He never asked for more than a pointer, the way you might ask a stranger in a gas station which corner would send you to the North Road. He left little things at rest areas when he could: batteries, a map, a rag folded clean in case somebody else was listening, and more, somebody else was acting. He did not tell dispatch. He did not try to explain it at counters or at tables with other drivers, because it was not a story in the usual sense. It was a company he had not applied to join. A silence that sometimes spoke when silence wasn't enough. A long road and a friendly house for your voice now and then, built out of call boxes and tower wires, and the absolute stubbornness of people who have decided kindness is a job. And on certain plains nights, when his route set him east under a lid of stars and the old lights on the old poles blinked their slow metronomes, a voice would drift into the cab and say his name, and a double click at the end would say that both the call and the listening counted. He would stay inside the lane. He would feel as small as a person sometimes should, and not alone in any way that hurt. The semis passed where they needed to pass. The road went on. The sky took it all in, and made of it a steady rhythm you could sleep to when your shift ended and your keys were in their place and the world had not forgotten you. Story number 4. Nadia Petrovich took the late-night appointments because the yards were quieter when the day crews went home and the conveyors slept. The route had been smooth and empty, a straight run across the river flats to a distribution park that glowed like a city of its own beyond the levee. Sodium lamps on tall masts made neat circles of pale gold in the mist. A train ran a slow line along a berm and sang to itself without urgency. Her trailer carried box paper goods stacked square, a kind load that didn't shift and didn't complain, strapped and sealed with a strip that flashed when her brake lights put red on it. Her GPS called out the turn with its calm voice, then let her alone. The sign at the park's entrance showed a map of roads inside like a board game. Loops and spurs, and cul-de-sacs labeled with letters. Arrows pointed to North Annex, West Fulfillment, Bulk, Returns. The guardhouse was a tidy rectangle with a clean window and a pot of something green in the light. A moth in the window thought about going in and decided to stay where it was. The guard slid open the drawer and handed her a badge on a clip and a laminated map with lines drawn in dry erase marker. Night receiving, he said in a voice that sounded like midnight shift coffee. Your Headwind Logistics. Appointment 0200. Dock P31. Nadia scanned the map and found A, B, C, D rows lined along the west side, like piano keys. There was an F, there was an H, there was no P. P31, she said, and the guard his name patch said Davis in stitched navy smiled like a person who has worked enough seasons to see labels change without warning. Old numbering, he said. They'll have the door lamp on for you. Follow the blue poles past North Annex. Keep left at the split, and it's tucked back there. The blue poles? She asked. From where she sat, every mast lamp in the yard was the same color. The pale of old paper. You'll see, he said. He wrote a number on the corner of her map with a pencil. If you need a yard dog, call this. If it rings and nobody picks, wait a little. They'll be on the other line. She eased through the open gate, felt the shallow bump where the seam in the concrete greeted her tires, and slid into a broad, sleeping city. Rows of trailers stood like quiet cattle, the company names, both famous and local, pale on their sides. Yard tractors hummed somewhere out of sight, their beepers sounding soft warnings as they danced trailers between doors. Air moved in light currents under the masts. A chain clinked somewhere, a gentle sound like something remembering to settle. Left of the main drag, North Annex announced itself with 4 blocky buildings joined by covered walkways. The buildings wore the kind of brick that made a person think of school gyms. Numbers in 6-inch stencils marked a long run of docks. 10, 12, 14. They marched up by even steps, newer paint over older paint, so that faded twins showed through like history under a map. She drove slow enough to let the trailer's shadow walk alongside. The ELD on the dash kept its mild blue light and recorded her on-duty yard time. The map in her lap grew less helpful as the lanes multiplied. Arrows painted on the concrete showed broad curves, and when she took one curve, she discovered 2 more. The sign for P31 did not exist. The rows went by with a certain logic, then kept going with a different one. A yard tractor came out from between 2 sleeping trailers with its strobe in a mild pulse. The driver inside waved without flapping the hand, just a lift that said hello and keep it steady. Nadia lifted her hand in answer. The cab of the yard dog had curtains on the back window like a tiny house. It turned, cut tight, and disappeared down a line that looked too narrow to hold anything. At a 3-way where the pavement was darker from years of tires taking the same cut, she stopped and looked. On her right, a run of docks had placards that were small and centered above each door instead of big and off to the side. The numbers there had a different font, thinner. 27P, read 1. 29P, read the next. The dash on a tilt. Someone had painted over the P in beige, and the letter was back anyway, showing through as if paint were a suggestion. Blue poles, she said to herself, hearing the guard's easy tone without wanting to, and realized the tall masts around the annex had a wrongness that wasn't wrong at all. Every third one was a shade cooler than the others, a whisper toward blue. Under those, the light read like pre-dawn, not like warehouse glow. If she blinked, the difference went away. If she looked at the edge of it, it stood up as clear as a river's edge in moonlight. She followed the cooler light. It led her into the lane where the odd-numbered P doors lived, the older style. The ones with small square windows in the overheads, instead of long slits. The concrete here had a different feel through the wheel. Not rougher, not smoother, just older, as if more seasons had passed over it. A breeze snuck around a corner and brought the dusty smell of cardboard and a cleaner lemon scent that belonged to day shifts. P31 sat 3 doors past a dented yellow guard pole with a patch of black paint at knee height, as if 100 boots had touched it on the way in. The stencil above the dock was crooked, 2 screws driven deep on one side and loose on the other so that the plate leaned. The door itself was shut, and the lamp to its right, it had the kind with a metal shade that could be aimed shine down onto the apron and through a tidy circle of light without showing who had turned it on. Nadia set her hazards. She slid the truck into her line the way a person slides a cup into a neat slot in a cupboard. The even pads of the dock bumpers waited. Her mirrors collected the edges in their arcs. The world on the driver's side sweeping in a long curve. The world on the passenger's side compressed into a smaller truth. She held the wheel steady and fed the trailer back along the yellow lines with small, patient turns. When the left corner began to draw a little too hard, she stopped, curled it forward half a yard, straightened, and backed again, until the bumpers tapped her frame in a soft greeting. The trailer settled. The yard around her went one shade quieter. The dock lamp flipped from green to red by itself, a square glow that meant, "Do not move." The receiving bell by the office door, a rustless circle with a button in the middle, heard her glove and chimed like a spoon touching the rim of a glass. Inside the small office window, a clipboard leaned against the glass with a pen on a string. No person met the window. No voice came through the little grill. She filled the fields she could on the BOL with careful block letters. Company. Appointment time. Pallet count. She slid the papers through the slot. They disappeared as if someone on the other side had been waiting with 2 fingers ready. That should have felt like human rhythm. It felt like standing on a rug that for 1 second did not remember it was supposed to be underfoot. Back in the cab, she set the brake and the chocks, dropped the airbags a whisper to make the plate meet the floor, and took a breath. The forklift beep found her from somewhere inside the annex, a gentle triple tone that said, "I am going backward, be where I am not." Pallet jacks make a shiver through a trailer when they turn. She felt that, a faint tug in the bones of the frame. The reefer behind her was quiet. There was no unit to mask the thuds and slides. The noises were ordinary, completely, and yet something in them was leaned a degree to one side of ordinary. An old-fashioned 2-tone radio search drifted out of the office. Not music, not talk, just that shy sound like a scanner checking for a friend. She watched the clock on the dash say 1:54, watched it say 1:53, then hold there. The ELD chirped a single polite beep and flagged yard move briefly, even though her rig did not move. She pressed the status back with a fingertip. The display stilled. The dock light outside her mirror red flashed once to green, then went red again, like a person lifting a hand to wave and thinking better of it. The trailer shook as the first pallet left the floor. She measured the weight shift, and it made sense. 80 inches of goods coming forward. The forklift's amber beacon made a faint theater on the wall of the warehouse opposite. Across her hood, the yard looked like it was breathing steam she could not see, then not, in a rhythm that was not hers. When she checked the clipboard at the window again, there was a stamp on the bowl canted at a slight angle in dark ink. Received Annex. The signature line held a neat, old-fashioned hand. R. Abrams. Below it, a time. 0209. She touched the paper, not to doubt it, but because the ink had an indentation she could feel. Her phone, when she thumbed it, said 2, 3. It was not an argument worth having. She kept to the small routines that make places behave. She stepped back around the truck and checked the chocks with a boot toe. She looked at the 5th wheel, because that is what she always did when the trailer was quiet. The night air by Dock P31 had the mild temperature of a gym after a game, a mix of cool outside and a store of building warmth. Somewhere deep, someone coughed, a sound big buildings make when ducts adjust. Another pallet came. The trailer raised an inch on its springs and settled. She could count them now by feel. 7 pallets across, 4 down. Some loads, made their own simple math. She stood by her step and looked into the slice of space between trailer and building where the dock plate rested. A shadow passed in there, the bright reflectors of a safety vest blinking in a pattern the forklift beacon made. It was the kind of thing that should have comforted because it meant hands and eyes and work. It made her think of a person the way a name on a fence post does. True and remote. When the last pallet left the deck, the dock light went green. The bell in the office chimed once, a sound more like a pat on the shoulder than an instruction. She raised her airbags, pulled her chocks, set her brake to release. The fifth wheel's jaws eased under. The rig lifted. The office window held the clipboard up to the glass and let it rest there, as if asking that she take it without fuss. She did. The man at the gate on the way out was not Davis. His patch said Ray's in white thread, and he had a heavily used thermos and a tidy stack of temporary badges next to his elbow. "You good?" he asked. "They treat you right?" "Fast," she said, flipping the bowl so he could scan the stamp with his eyes. He did, and he leaned a little close without leaning actually closer. She watched his face make a shape that was not confusion, exactly, just a wrinkle in the narrative. "You went to P31, he said without a question mark in his sentence, just the flat tone of someone checking a number against habit. "North Annex." "Yes," she said. "Old numbering, I was told." "Old," he echoed, like a person tasting a memory. He lifted his radio, keyed it without making it obvious, and said into it, "Receiving gate. You got Annex open tonight?" The answer came muffled and cheerful, a voice with some music in it. "No, sir. Annex is dark. We got 3 in west, 1 in bulk. That's it." Reyes let the key go, glanced again at the neat rectangle of ink on Nadia's BOL. "You'll sleep nice with that done," he said, deciding the conversation had reached the appropriate amount of detail. He stamped her pass and handed it back. North Annex was supposed to be closed when they laid the new floor. "They shift things around. Don't mind it." She didn't mind it. She minded that her ELD had marked her stop time as 2:06 without having ever marked 2:05, and then that it had allowed 2:09, catching up as if a bit of the yard didn't belong to the same clock as the rest. But she minded these things in a practical way, the way a person makes a note in their head to mention the oddity to nobody at all. On her way to the highway, she glanced back once and saw the annex under the mist. The blue cool lamps made their own small country in the far corner, a patch where the air looked like early morning. For a second and only a second, the light over P31 moved, as if someone had brushed past it with a shoulder, and the beam swung and settled. 2 days later, on the return leg with a different load bound for a different building in the same park, she came at the annex by daylight because she was early, and the yard was calm, and the angle of sun showed truths that night made music out of. The cool towers in the distance had their steam bright. The train on the berm had shut up, and the line of cars was a snake of rust. The masts were just masts, their bulbs a straight industrial white. The annex did not look as she had left it. A chain lay across the approach lane with 2 cones standing beside it like considerate chaperones. A metal sign on a post read, "Remotal access only." The dock doors in the P-run had padlocks through their handles, not all but most. The shapes in the small square windows were drywall and stacked skids. The stencil over P31 had been loosened and set at a straighter tilt, as if someone had come with a driver and a box of screws and decided to fix the least of things first. The office window was simply glass. On the brick to the right of the receiving door, a plaque had a dull, clean shine the way brass does when someone wipes it weekly. It wasn't large. It held 5 lines, neat as ledger entries. North Annex Receiving, in recognition of Robert Abrams, for dedicated night service. During the flood and outage of '09, keep the chain moving. The font had the gravity of an old invoice. Someone had stuck a small felted dot under one corner to keep it from rattling when the wind came up. Nadia read the name and felt the hiccup that comes when 2 parts of a day suddenly see each other. She set her hand flat on the cool brick like that might close a circuit, and then let it fall. A yard tractor eased by and gave a little salute from its strobe. A woman walking between buildings with a clipboard under her arm paused, as if to adjust her pace to a person who seemed to be waiting for something. Then she went on. Her delivery that morning went to West Fulfillment without fuss. A clean dock with big bright numbers and a supervisor who signed her page with a quick R. Tully and a smile that said she was thinking about lunch. It put her afternoon on schedule in a pleasant way. She did not tell Dispatch any of it. Dispatch had other kinds of stories to mind. She did not tell the waitress at the lunch counter, where she leaned her elbow and ate half a plate of scrambled eggs at 10:30 and watched a TV show she didn't care about. She folded the BOL with received annex on it and put it in the little black book where she kept her own notes. Miles should have left earlier. Fuel price here cheap. And she wrote beneath it in her compact hand, North Annex P31, Fast, R. Abrams, thanks. Like a person writing a reminder to remember something that wasn't a fact but was important. On a later night, coming in from the river again with another easy load and the same quiet yard, she looked toward the annex out of habit and found the blue cool lamps. Sleeping, the chain across the lane, no bell lit. She was not disappointed. It had been busy when it needed to be. That was enough. Still, as she rolled past the guardhouse, she saw a bulletin board inside at the end of the counter, the place where visitors' passes and announcements lived. A small square of an old photo, printed from a copier with the lines that copiers add, showed 3 people in vests standing under a dock lamp with a night sky behind them. The lamp in the photo made a hard circle of light that looked almost like daylight. Someone had written at the bottom in pen, Annex Crew, years back. That winter. And below, keep the chain moving. On nights that followed, when a gate guard sent her to some corner that felt like it might not exist, or when a company map had A, B, C, D, and no P, she did what the first guard had told her. She followed the light that was a hair different, listened for the triple tone of a forklift, and kept faith with the small routines that make strange places behave. The docks took her in. The bells chimed. She walked paperwork to windows where sometimes a person waited and sometimes a clipboard did, and the stamp always left enough dent in the fibers of the paper to say a hand had brought it down. Every so often, when a night smelled like cardboard and lemon and a quiet gym after a game, she would find that an old-style signature had already settled on her page when she reached for it in the slot, and the dock lamp would swing a half-inch as if a shoulder had brushed it, and she would say without making any sound, "Thanks." The yard would breathe its slow breath and answer, and the masts would be just lights again. Story number 5. Harper Quinn did not mind tunnels. Some drivers took the outside road to avoid them, added miles for the sake of sky. She liked the honesty of a long-bore one direction, one lane, a metronome of lights that kept thoughts neat. On the East Ridge route she ran twice a month. The mountain offered up 2 tunnels like bookends, relics from a time when concrete and tile were promises kept with a firm hand. Night had come soft with low cloud, the kind that settled on hills and made the world smaller in a friendly way. Her flatbed carried empty racks back toward a plant where they would be filled with new product, all strapped snug and humming softly in the wind. The dash kept a gentle glow. The CB slept. A thermos sat in its cubby like a quiet clock. She eased into the grade where the highway shouldered the mountain and felt the small change in pressure that meant bored stone was ahead. The first tunnel, Westgate, was short lights bright, tile clean, a fan that did its work without asking anyone to notice. She took it at the posted speed, eyes where they belonged, hands easy. The second, Leeward, tunneled deeper. Its portals had an older style to them, arched concrete with a simple date stamped near the crown, 1959. The approach carried new signs on steel posts with reflective faces. Tunnel, ahead, lights on. Do not stop. No lane change. A set of electric message boards above the lanes added something she hadn't seen in a while. Single, lane operation shift left maintenance. Arrow boards blinked ascent. She felt the little friendly tightening that drivers feel when the world narrows. It wasn't fear, it was respect. Taper cones marched her into the left lane. The right side had a line of barrels with yellow blinkers that pulsed together like a calm heart. A maintenance pickup sat just outside the portal with an amber strobe. No people in sight. The tunnel mouth waited like a quiet room. As she entered, a voice arrived in her cab in the crisp, feathered way of an old public address. Leeward eastbound, it said, as if speaking specifically to the situation and not to her. Maintain 40 through. Water at joint 3.1. Watch for narrowing. Her radio was off. She checked anyway, thumb moving to the familiar switch by feel. Off. The voice hadn't come from it. The sound carried a little reverb in it, the way voices do when they travel along tile and concrete and set themselves down in someone else's space. It did not feel invasive. It felt like someone in another room telling the room a fact. The tunnel took her in. Lights on the ceiling played a steady rhythm. Tiles along the walls alternated in two tones, cream and a green, so pale it read as memory. The gray dipped a touch, then leveled. Every 500 feet the wall opened into an emergency bay with a shallow alcove, a red cabinet marked phone, a bench with metal slats, a glass that would have held a fire extinguisher back when that was the style. In the first bay, something reflective stood at the edge of the light, and then stepped backward. Not a person exactly, maybe a vest on a hook, maybe a trick of the beam. Maintain speed, said the voice, the way signs say things. Avoid stopping between bays. Her mirrors held the tunnel's long vanishing. The hum in the fans above had a deep tone like a note in the middle of a piano, not menacing, just present. She let her eyes trace the way the tiles met at the corners, found the micro-wobbles drivers learned to use to keep themselves awake, tiny imperfections in lines that looked straight. She had a habit of counting the lights in sets of 8. It was as good a prayer as any. A dotted number on the wall slid by. 2.8. She passed it. 2.9. The voice had said 3.1. She waited the way you wait for an exit you've been told exists. At 3, a thin seam across the floor shone a little. At 3.1, water worked its old habit. Moisture had wept through concrete and made a thin plate where a joint lay proud by the thickness of a coin. She eased 0.5 miles an hour off and let her tires straddle the worst of it. The tunnel gave a tiny, indifferent thanks, the way infrastructure does when treated kindly. In the next bay, a shape was clearer. A figure stood near the red cabinet hat, crisp and white. The way hard hats are, when they're new, vest a dull reflective that the tunnel turned into its own weak glow. The figure lifted a hand, not frantic, not insisting, the way a person at a crosswalk might lift a hand to let you know they see you and have no intention of stepping out. Harper lifted 2 fingers from the bottom of the wheel without meaning to, in a gesture more rural than city, an answer. The PA spoke again, not louder, not softer. Vehicle. Following too close. Do not respond. No stopping. In her mirror, a light set itself at the polite detached distance that isn't actually polite at all when you're 40,000 pounds. She left it alone. The tunnel made people do foolish things. It felt like an intimate space. Cars tucked too near like they were seeking company. The emergency bay slipped past. In the mirror, the figure in the vest took 3 steps and became a suggestion again. The lights ticked their 8s. The ELD let out a single small chirp, the kind it gave when it wanted something trivial and bureaucratic. The screen, which usually minded its own business, blinked to a blank, then returned as if it had only been thinking. The time on it, at the top right, hiccuped. 2:12 became 2:11, and then 2:12 again. It was nothing that would matter on a page. It mattered to the animal part of her that kept track of minutes when it was dark and inside a mountain. Fan test, said the PA with no urgency. A low siren rolled through the tunnel like a wave, far away, then near, then gone. It wasn't loud. It was just thorough. Her hands stayed easy. The car behind her dropped back another 30 feet, shamed by a sound not aimed at it. At bay 4, the figure stood again. Same hat, same vest, same hand lifted. Had it moved faster than a walking person could? She didn't feel spooked. Spooked was for things that wanted to make their own weather. This felt like maintenance, some old, useful kind nobody put on the schedule anymore. She remembered a man at a rest stop once telling a story about these tunnels. He had patterns of concrete dust ground into the knees of his bibs, and a way of standing that meant he had worked on things nobody noticed, unless they failed. They used to staff the bores, he'd said, stirring creamer into coffee like the cup would never fill. Makers reps, state guys, a person in each control room all night. Fans without computers, needed eyes. We lost a few people along the way, the usual way you lose people in jobs, tires, hearts, slopes that look better than they are. But the tunnels keep their manners. They'll tell you if you're listening. The PA clicked once, as if affirming that he hadn't been making up anything. Grade rises in 1/4 mile, it said. Seep at right shoulder. Stay left of joint. Vehicle and breakdown bay, no flashers. Maintain. Harper could see the glow in the next bay, a subdued silver, not blink, a parked shape. The shadow was compact like a small SUV. It sat too close to the travel lane, as if whoever had stopped it had misjudged width. She kept her lane. She gave it space without giving it attention. The SUV held its stillness the way a pond holds a reflection. The tile changed slightly. Here and there, a section wore a different pattern, older or newer by a decade. Harper felt, in a way that had nothing to do with math and everything to do with the back of the neck, that she had been under the mountain a long time. The run between portals had stretched like a piece of warm sugar pulled by hand. She made herself look for named things. The faint painted lines that marked distances. The gray of the ceiling darkening ahead where vents had collected more years of deposits than the sections behind. The way the mirror showed her trailer following as if it were its own polite animal. She breathed in through her nose and let it out. A soft tone spread down the tunnel, more bell than siren, like the sound in an old station when a code button gets pressed to call a clerk from a back room. The PA said, "Personnel in the walkway. Do not stop. Do not drift right." The walkway she had forgotten there was one ran behind the tile at foot level, a path that maintenance used to check the slit drains and the seams. She could not see it. She imagined it anyway. Narrow, concrete, a handrail at knee level, the smell of water and dust and a hint of old electricity. The figure in the next bay stood at the very edge of the light, palm up as if feeling the air. This time, Harper noticed the details that made the old and the new sit side by side without quarreling. The vest had reflective tape in a pattern that wasn't exactly the modern 1-2 horizontal bands, one high and one low, and a single vertical strip, but the hard hat had a newer shape with a bump for a headlamp clip. The gloves were the cotton kind with rubber palms they handed out in pallets. It could be anyone. It could be 100 someones over 60 years. Time, the PA said. Not a command, not even a noun that felt pointed, just a word set down like a tool on a bench. Her dash clock showed 2:14. Her phone said 2:18. The little digital mile count in the cluster had ticked, then ticked back. She thought of a watch she'd seen once, the kind that had to be wound, the second hand swinging forward, then hesitating, the ratchet catching and then letting go. Emergency phones operational, the PA said, as if it were reading checklist items aloud to itself and letting her listen. Vent 7 to 8 on manual. Left shoulder drains compromised at 2 points. Clear. The car behind her had vanished. That was either good or bad. She didn't go hunting for its light in the mirror anymore. It wasn't hers to mind. Up ahead, a long breath of darker air stood near the ceiling, like a different weather had snuck in. In the last third of the tunnel, the walls changed again, this time to a different whiter. Newer tiles with fewer hairline cracks. The PA's throw picked up a sharper echo. Harper felt the slope begin to lift, the pull of the engine easing. The sense of time still had that slippage to it, like standing in surf where water moves the sand under your feet and makes you taller for a second. "Leeward eastbound," said the PA as though concluding a chapter. "Portal in sight. Watch for grade change at threshold. Resurface 2023. Slight lip. Maintain. Please do not stop on exit." She saw the portal like a piece of sky. Even at night, the square of outside had a color that the tunnel didn't. It read as space you could taste, as if the air wanted to let go of its ceiling and be taller. The last bay appeared to the right, and the figure was there for a blink, facing the oncoming light. The lifted hand did not wave her down. It was simply, stubbornly up, a small sign for the living to keep their eyes where they needed to be. She came out into an open mouth of night, and the little relief that meets a driver, then a small lift in the chest as a mountain stops being directly above the world. The road beyond the portal had a patchwork of old and new asphalt. The cones that had led her in weren't here. The right lane still held a closed feel, though no barrels lined it. The maintenance pickup she had seen on the west side didn't have a twin here. A green sign announced a service plaza in 2 miles. Summit Plaza. It said in a font that belonged to a different era, the wider letters with their own quiet confidence. She took the exit because she always did after tunnels, the strong habit of checking everything after a place where the world has less room for error. The ramp lifted to a broad, low building with a long roof and small windows, a design someone had loved in a year that wore thick ties. The parking lot held a dozen vehicles spaced with the careful gaps night drivers leave for each other. Inside the plaza, A coffee machine with a brushed metal face whistled like a train toy. A shelf held maps that still had counties printed away that made them look like quilts. A bulletin board near the doors had a small gallery of photos pinned up with pushpins plows, a ribbon cutting, a group of people in old hard hats standing under a sign that said Leeward Portal Ventilation Upgrade. A caption under that one in thin black Sharpie read, Night Crew, 09, keep your lane. A person in the front row, the only woman, held her helmet under her arm and grinned at the lens with the expression of someone not used to being photographed and deciding to bear it with good humor. Harper poured coffee and didn't drink it yet. She stepped back outside under the high sodium lamps and listened to the dark. The plaza made its small noises. A soda machine compressor taking a breath, a distant door closer, easing a piece of glass into a frame. Down by the curb, a low bronze plaque in the landscaping caught a slant of light. She went to it because that's what people do when there are words set into metal. Leeward Tunnel, dedicated to the crews who keep the mountain moving. Night Monitor, M. Shaw. Don't stop where the air is thinner than your thoughts. The line rested there with a plainness that suggested someone had said it once, and the people around had liked the way it sounded enough to keep it. The bottom corner of the plaque had a little notch in it, a flaw that someone had decided not to correct. Plantings around the marker were tidy. A single pair of white gloves sat folded on the low wall as if forgotten. They had rubber palms worn smoother than new. They were not damp. They were not dusty. They were just gloves. When she merged back onto the highway, the signs had their more modern shape again. The message boards were blank. The cones that had guided her left did not exist in the eastbound lanes from this side. It didn't bother her. Highways are always changing into earlier versions of themselves at night, for minutes at a time, for reasons that make sense to the people in Bede. The vests. The next morning, at a fuel stop that had a small stand of trees doing their best against wind, a driver at the next pump noticed the East Ridge mud on her fenders and said, conversational, "How was Leeward? I heard they were working fans again." "Single lane through," Harper said. "Some seep. They've got a voice on the PA. Gives good calls." She didn't say where the voice had come from. She didn't say that she had not seen a soul on the floor. The other driver nodded like a person who had delivered in the city and learned not to ask questions if there was no problem attached. "They'll talk you through if the computers have opinions," he said, wrangling his own hose. "My uncle worked control in the old days. Walked that walkway every shift. Said the tile hums when a person needs it. Said the tunnel knows the difference between loud and useful." He smiled at the gas cap like it was an old friend. "He'd have liked last night then," Harper said. "It was useful. After that, the tunnels didn't change, and neither did she." On the nights she rode toward them, she turned her lights on early and checked her mirrors twice and let her hands remember their good habits. Inside, she counted her lights in eights. She watched for the numbers on the wall and the small seams where water works its way back to its old beds. If a voice arrived with something simple and specific to say, she did not argue with it. She kept 40 when 40 felt right, and 41 when it felt better, and never 45, which was wrong in a way that the body knows like it knows uneven ground. Sometimes the emergency bays were empty. Sometimes a figure wearing used-up reflective tape lifted a palm at the edge of the light. Always, on every pass from then on, she glanced over the low wall at the exit where the asphalt met the outside and let her tires find the smoothest place. Keeping it smooth was respect for all the people. Night gathers under roofs, people at switchboards and behind glass and in walkways. The public will never see people whose names sit quietly on plaques and have a job no louder than keeping a lane open for strangers at 2 in the morning. When the tunnel added a new sign months later, a clean digital board that read, "Thank you for not stopping," Harper smiled without showing it. The readout underneath flashed a time that matched her dash and her phone. The ELD, for its part, stopped hiccuping at the portal, as if, in its small computer heart, it too had learned the right way through. Story number 6. Rowan Pike liked roads that required manners. Summer interstates were loud and fast. Winter ice was quiet and strict. And the strictness suited him. Out on the white thread a seasonal road spelled across the frozen backs of lakes and muskeg, the rules weren't decorative. They were the difference between a load delivered and a story people told with hands flat on a table. He topped off at the South Camp under a sky that had no moon and a faint sheet of light to the north that might be aurora or might be imagination. The diesel tank lids clicked shut with a note he could feel through his glove. The camp shack's door held a clipboard painted with nail polish so the numbers wouldn't wash off. Drivers wrote their call signs, and the minute they took the ice, a hand-lettered poster tacked up inside the window said what everyone already knew. Windows cracked, dome lights off, no sudden stops, no bunching, 22, and no more. White thread 2, departing 047, he said to the log, pencil knocking lightly against the board. The clerk on duty lifted a thermos in quiet salute. No other units, she said. Listen to the lake. Check in at Gull Point if you have to step. He nodded. He knew the old habit. If you did stop at a warming shack, you left something small behind. Batteries. A note. The pencil you used, sharp. His rig for winter was a little different than the long-haul setup. The front bumper wore an aluminum bar that kept slush from jumping. Chains lived in a neat roll he hoped not to touch. The tires were narrow and bit the ice with a sure sound. The trailer carried diesel bound for a community up the chain. It was weighty but within the posted limit for the season's thickness. Everything sat properly. He kept his windows parted a finger's width on both sides. Not enough to lose heat, enough to let through the low song of the ice and the useful noises of the world. The snow machine path to the lake was rutted with sled marks and the shadows they threw. He took the ramp at a patient angle, heavy equipment scars making old waves in the ice where the first freeze had lifted, then settled again. The light from his lamps found a pair of spruce boughs stuck upright in the frozen surface. They marked the edge of the travel lane the way they had always done up here, old as the first places anyone called a road. Reflectors on thin fiberglass rods lived between them, cat eyes, that returned a little green wink as his lights moved. The truck rolled onto the lake, and the world under the tires changed shape in his bones. The serious, hollow, living feeling of water that had turned itself into something else for a while. The first stretch was simple. The route people had laid out made a gentle angle to spread weight. The markers were spaced in a rhythm a person could trust. The cold eased sound into clarity. Small things carried. Somewhere off to his right, a fox set its feet down and made hardly any noise at all. He kept it at 22 by the dial, steady enough that a quarter coin on the dash would have stood on edge. The lake said nothing that meant anything yet, just small ticks like a house giving back the day's heat. He could see the glow from the southern shore for a while, then it sank and left him with the line of reflectors and the slow sense of movement people get when the horizon is asleep. There was no other company, no moving dots behind, no ahead. Except after a mile, there were two lights. They were low and far and orange, and they moved the way taillights move when a driver with good habits keeps steady. They were too distant to haul him in and too present to dismiss. He checked his mirror as if doing so would change decisions already made, and saw only ice and the curve of the world stopping where his own lamps ended. A ridge announced itself ahead, as a dark seam where snow had drifted up against pressure. People had planed a ramp over it and scattered grit in a fine, stingy way. A spruce bough lay across the old crossing closed, and a new path angled away to the left, a smarter place where the ridge had eased. He felt the small lift as the drivers before him had felt it. Tail lights floated beyond, steady, not kite keeping, not kite disappearing. At Gull Point, the warming shack stood on the lee, a plywood cube with a window and an old door. The sign on its face was humor made practical. Hotter than your truck. He was not stopping, but the old rule said you checked your window when you passed. If it had fogged, you cleaned it quick. Because when you wanted to see and needed it badly, you shouldn't be standing in the wind wondering. He slowed enough for a look. The pane was clear. A sheet tacked inside the glass had a line for each day's weather handwriting in pencil. Beside tonight, someone had written crisp and small. Shifting leads at Caribou Cut. Follow willows. He didn't love hearing leads had opened. Still, water under ice moved where it liked. That was the nature of lakes. Crews kept their eyes out and shifted routes. He glanced toward the far edge in the direction the note meant. In the distance, the orange pair drifted toward shore, low, taking the idea first and making it look like common sense. There were places where the ice road came to land and ran a short portage through trees. The willows bent there in a way winter made simple. He could pick the trail by texture, packed snow where machines had passed, tiny starbursts of brittle twigs under tire. The reflectors here were older, some with a faint blue tint in their returns, the kind of plastic they'd used 10 or 15 seasons ago. He felt no particular way about that. Crews reused what worked. The willow path took him alongside the lake within sight of the open water, black as lidded eyes. The cold had edged the lead with delicate white, where fresh ice tried its luck in the company of bigger cousins. He kept his hands easy, let the track be what it was. When the road returned him to the lake, a new set of bows marked the transition down. The taillights reappeared beyond, as if the driver ahead had already made the change, already done the arithmetic. Half an hour in, the lake spoke up, not in protest, but as if explaining itself. A low, rounded sound came from an indeterminate direction, ran under the truck like a slow drum, and went on. He recognized it from safety meetings and quiet nights in other years. A pressure wave moves with a heavy thing on ice. If a driver disrespected it too fast, too slow, stopped at the wrong time, the wave could fold on itself against a ridge like a rug against a door. The rule asked for evenness. He held the wheel like a person holds the edges of a tray with clean water on it. The wave ran its old line on. The sound softened. The lake breathed, as if satisfied, and let it go. On the second lake, where the markers pulled in a little and the track's curve felt more practiced, a cluster of extra reflectors made a chevron across the lane. The brand new directions for this season were a pretty green. Tucked behind them, he saw a few with scuffed faces, and a different angle of return blue-white, like frost on a pane, and not where they should have been. They suggested a slightly wider arc taken another year, and for a moment the patterns overlaid like two sets of lines on a page. He stayed with the current season's green. He would trust the new unless the new gave him a straight lie. Still, the older line kept him looking with a different attention than he'd had on the first mile. He learned from both. The taillights played the far side of his reach, present enough to keep his eyes engaged, mild enough not to annoy. Sometimes they went away as the route bent, and then came back right where they would be if someone had simply kept their part. He had not seen them lengthen or shorten. He had not seen them aside from the orange. No box around them gave away make, no brighter stop. Lamp told him a brake had been pressed. He kept his foot where it belonged, and his mind on the work. At Caribou Cut proper, the willows leaned in the wind, even though there was hardly any. The open lead had pried the trail to shore again. Here the bank climbed in a small, clean ramp. Someone had run a grader before sundown. The edge was crisp. A stick with ribbon tied to the top stood 3 feet back from the new path, and the ribbon had weather on it that said this wasn't brand new. Beyond, the entirely plausible red triangle of a hazard marker lay at the old spot like a caution put to bed. He followed the willows again. There were tracks he trusted, and these were them. The old blue tint reflectors appeared in pairs now, like a secondary spine laid alongside the green. He let them be part of his map. On shore, he crept past an idling loader pointed nose out toward the lake, its beacon asleep, its windows ghosted with a little frost. It made the kind of heat that rises but doesn't travel far. Nobody sat in it, but the hood had the warm faintness that meant someone had been there a not long time ago. A board nailed beside a tree said, "Cut Open Portage Active Call Radio Channel listed." He didn't key up. The radio was set, and the camp had the time he had taken the lake. They would know. The taillights passed the loader without touching them, fussed at no sign, made no comment. He fell back to the ice 10 minutes later and went level again, the rig's voice going hollow and agreeable. Ahead, the orange dots took a bend. He realized all at once he was measuring his breathing against their relative stillness and laughed softly at himself. A person could use anything as a metronome out here. You could count fence posts that didn't exist. You could count your own heart. 2 made a pattern easier than 1. North Camp announced itself with a bunch of high mast lights that looked necessity bright after the lake. Low buildings sat hunkered, practical. The sort of place where presence was more important than pretty. He eased up the ramp and rolled onto gravel. The taillights climbed the ramp too, then slipped out of his sight around a stack of snow and didn't present themselves again. He set brake and chocks and left the engine to its idle in the cold. He went inside for signatures. "South says you left at 047, said the dispatcher, a woman in a knit cap with a palm sticking up like a cheer. "We got you at 231. "All good in the middle?" "All good," Rowan said. He hesitated. He disliked sounding like a story. Still, It felt wrong to let the question pass without speaking. I had a lead ahead of me. Kept to 22 kept their lane. You expecting someone else on the thread tonight? She checked a screen that was as unromantic as a calculator. Not till 3. You were alone. She smiled a little. Not the way people smile when they're brushing something off, but the way they smile when they've heard the same report 100 times and decided it was not worth arguing. Sometimes folks see orange eyes up there. Keep people disciplined, those eyes. We don't mind it. He slept 4 hours in a bunkhouse room where heat ticked through baseboard and the smell of somebody's laundry soap sat and waited for its owner to return from a night shift. When he woke, the world was white and leveled clouds sitting low, light coming from everywhere, a simple day. He fueled and rolled south. Day didn't have the same language as night, but it had meanings. He could see now where the portage cut had run in other years, where old reflectors had been drilled into pine and later removed, leaving a hole a finger could find. In places, the older blue-white markers he thought he'd followed were not actually there, except a ghost of a screw hole, a dark ring where a bracket had once been. He checked the new green reflectors by habit with his eyes and brushed past a place where the road had been a foot further east in some older winter. The lake was quiet. The day made the strict road look almost casual. He stopped at the Gull Point hut because he had promised himself he would. The door stuck a little like doors do up here. Wood learns the season and narrows and widens with it. Inside, the air was warmer than out by hardly anything and felt like kindness anyway. A bench held a stack of wool blankets, folded and a little tired but serviceable. On the wall, a piece of plywood had been screwed up and painted with chalkboard paint, gray, black, and ready. Drivers had left messages there all season. Watch the left at Linden. Use the new down ramp. Lead open Tuesday night. Now closed. Under tonight's pencil script, a cautious, neat hand about willows, a different message sat half erased, as if someone had thought better of the size of it but not of the sentiment. Keep pace. Don't look for a friend you don't need. The lake walks with you. B. He put a spare flashlight at the edge of the bench because he had promised himself he'd leave something too, and because a flashlight becomes invaluable exactly when you think you should have brought one. He sharpened the pencil the way he had been taught as a child, shaving curls of wood in patient spirals, then wrote a simple line in the right corner and signed only with his call sign. Thanks for the line. On the way out, a raven watched him from the top of a reflector pole, all intelligence and careful distance. It made a sound that didn't belong to any English word he knew, an amused sound, and then flew ahead in 3 easy hops from pole to pole before deciding it had better things to do. Southbound, the day opened at the seam between lakes, and he could measure the length of his rig against bare lines in somewhere that wasn't white now. He passed the place where the wave had rolled under him and did not hear the drum today. The ice didn't need to announce itself again. It knew he knew. At the camp, he signed the sheet and handed in the papers and reported nothing out of the ordinary because nothing had been, not in any way that someone had to fix. The clerk with the thermos glanced at him with the same not quite quirk of a smile he'd seen up north and tipped the lid in a small nod. Behind her, tacked to the plywood wall among notices about tire studs and a photo of a moose that had wandered down the lane last year, an old Polaroid sagged at one corner. It showed a pair of taillights cut off from the world by night, a tiny breath of fog between them. Someone had written on the white border with a pen that had almost run out. Berg's line, it said, and then, smaller. Keep 22. Keep the window cracked. Keep the thread. Rowan drove the thread again and again that winter. On some nights, there were no orange dots ahead, and he counted reflectors in pairs and was content. On some nights there were, and he kept 22 the way every sign asked, and let the lights be what they were without hunting for an owner. He didn't tell stories that made the road less practical than it was. He didn't ask for reasons from clerks who had coffee to pour and logs to mind. He learned the sound the lake made when it wanted him to respect the next mile a little more. He learned to feel a pressure ridge before he could name it. He learned that if he put his hand out of the window just enough, the air would carry the cold and the warning in a way glass could not. When the season ended and the camps packed their gear, when crews pulled up reflectors and stuck spruce boughs in piles that would feed somebody's stove in a shoulder season, he took one last pass in daylight on the last safe morning and saw his own tire tracks on clear ice, the soft chalk smudge of winter's work laid in a line. He saw, for an instant, a set of orange reflections at the far rim of a lake, where the road fell back to water. Then the angle shifted, and the world became all practical again, wet and green and ordinary. He turned his wheel off the ice and onto gravel, listened to the change in the tone coming up through the cab, and rolled on, persuaded once more to respect the strict places because they repay it in safe passages, and in small company you don't have to talk about to believe in. Story number 7. Elias Garner ran the levee road on nights when the river talked in its sleep. He liked the way the black water kept its own counsel, how barges down on the current made their low horns into patient vowels that drifted across reeds and fields. His tractor was an old friend with the rattle sorted out, and the dash lights turned down to the color of new pennies. The trailer behind carried produce under a light, chill, soft hum from the unit. Nothing too loud, just another breath in the cab. The river-run locals called it that whether the signs did or not was a raised stripe of asphalt that parted cane and marsh and broad, flat water. At its best, it was a ribbon rolled across the tops of something too big to see the bottom of. At its worst, it took rain personally and put it back across the road like a thin, shiny veil to see if you were paying attention. Signs nodded at outsiders. Low area. Slick. When wet. Use caution at bridge. The people who lived near it had their own sign language light left on in a porch at the right place. A pair of lanterns hung on a gate that meant the slab down by the boat ramp was dry enough to trust. Elias took the turn onto the levee with the calm a person gets when a place has taught them manners. He set his speed under the posted just a hair, felt the tires find the right center, let the reefer's quiet hum be a companion. The sky overhead was a close dome with little islands of cloud. All of it lit from nowhere by a kind of thin, comfortless glow that felt normal here. Crickets practiced at the edges of hearing. The river, off beyond the thin dark wall of trees that lived along its lip, said nothing at all. A boat ramp turnout arrived on his right, 2 floodlight poles with their heads turned down like they were shy, a patch of gravel tamped hard by 100 trailers backing careful. He rolled past it at an easy pace. The window by his left knee was cracked a finger's width to let the world's small information in. That was how he heard a sound too light to be anything but paws on gravel, a little skitter, not a rush. He let the rig drift and checked the mirror. A shape stepped into his headlight edge and then out again, a dog's body the color of dry cane, with the white flags at the toes and chest that make a creature glow in a beam. He didn't stop. He thought about stopping. There was no reason for a dog to be out at that hour on a levee ramp, unless someone had 100 practical stories lined up. He made it to the next signpost, breathed once, checked the shoulder, and pulled into a long, narrow gravel fan meant for equipment. He set the brake, turned on hazards, small, polite squares of amber pulsing the same way everything in this low country pulsed and waited. The dog found him in 3 beats of the hazard lights. Not in a sprint, not in a panic. It trotted, light on the edge of the road, head turned a little like it was thinking on which side of the truck a person would be. Up close, it wore a collar, blue in daylight probably, now just a bright ring in the beam with thin reflective tape stitched along it. A tag hung from the collar shaped like a badge star, not a simple round. The dog put its front feet on the step like it had practiced, and looked into the cab with eyes that held exactly as much ask as a driver can stand. Elias argued with himself as he reached for the latch. You don't put strange animals in a cab. You do not make yourself into a rescue when you are 40,000 pounds. And the road has no shoulders worth their name. The dog waited. He cracked the door. Turns out you do what you have to when the night presents you with someone wearing a reflective collar and a face that has been told by people enough times that trucks are friends. Okay, he said into the smell of river and diesel. He made a seat out of nothing on the passenger side, a jacket he wasn't using, a clipboard he didn't need to sit on, and patted it once. Only until the next town. The dog took the invitation like it had been waiting for it. It gathered itself and leaped into the cab without touching any shiny or breakable thing on the way. It's Saturday. It put one paw on the very edge of the rubber mat, as if that were a boundary someone had explained. Its breathing settled into the rhythm of the engine. Elias closed the door and felt the cab return to its little weather. Up close, the collar's tag was easy enough to read if a person was willing to hold a flashlight and go a little cross-eyed at the same time. The engraving was neat, not fancy. Bud, River 7, it said on the first line. Below that, if found, call station and a number. The dog lifted its head like it would rather not be asked to stand still for too long. He didn't tease. He let the tag settle back and put the flashlight in its slot. You and I are going exactly to town, he said. as if the dog might have been waiting to hear those very words. He set the truck in motion and eased it back onto the thin, confident lane. The levee road ahead offered its simple tests. The first bridge ran over a spillway low concrete deck with metal rails that could make a song at a certain tire speed. He took it without reluctance. Halfway across, the dog put its nose up, not to the air vent, just toward the left mirror horizon. A point a living thing picks when it is reading the world with a part of itself people don't get to borrow. Alias felt the smallest slide under him, where a film of invisible water had made the deck slicker than the approach. He didn't brake for it. He didn't need to. He let his speed be what it was, and listened to the tone of tire on wet change and change back. The dog's ears tipped, approving of something, or so it felt. By habit, he flicked on the CB to channel 19 for a minute as he crossed the furthest low spot. "Any trouble on the run?" he asked the wide, practicing darkness. The radio gave back a hush that wasn't empty. A click like someone somewhere had thought about speaking and declined. He shut it down again. He didn't feel any more or less alone. With a speaker on, lights ahead drew into shape as he drove. A pair of red dots kept graceful pace a mile in front, as if someone else had taken the levee at the same speed, at the same hour, with the same appreciation for the way water next to a road makes time simple. Taillights can turn into company you do not have to discuss anything with. He let them be what they were. The dog did not look at them once. Something about that struck him as odd. Dogs are, by their nature, excitable about other things that move. This animal had moved into the job of passenger, not of chaser. At mile 45, where the levee flattened into a run that felt like open arm, a shape lay in the lane ahead, a long, low thing dark enough to be an absence. It could have been a roll of carpet, or a length of irrigation hose, or anything the wind and a bad strap made. The dog went still, eyes set hard at that particular stretch of road, the way a person looks at a word they are not sure they remember. Elias tapped the horn twice, polite, just to give any living creature in that shadow a chance to change the story. The shape did not behave like an animal. He had room to move left. The opposite lane gave him nothing to fear for 2 county miles. He slid, held, and slid back. The dog exhaled and flattened its ears for the length of the pass, in what anyone might have called a wince if dogs had a word for that. "What are you doing out here, bud?" he asked in a tone that was not quite talking to himself. "And why do you know the road this way?" At the next pullout, just a wide spot by a stand of willow that made a kind of tunnel roof above a beat-up picnic table. He parked where the shadow wouldn't trick his mirrors. The dog sat, watching the light thrown by his headlights shape leaves and then unshape them when the wind changed its mind. In the distance, a barge murmured. The levee breathed one of its long, soft breaths. From where he sat, he could see only the river's reflection through the trees, but the sound came up clean enough. Water talked to itself down there, rolling on slow stories older than the road. The dog lifted a paw and settled it again, restless, not nervous. The tag bumped the collar, making a small metallic clink that belonged in a kitchen, not on a levee at midnight. The town arrived by degrees, the way towns do, a scatter of yard lights on the inland side first, then a tidy water plant with its own night glow, then the sign with the town's name punched in reflective letters. Street. Heron, it said. The post office was a small, proper square with a flag roommates with fog. The volunteer fire station lived next to it like a square with a larger square attached. The bay doors were shut. One still showed the wet track of a truck that had come back not long ago. Over the door, a set of numbers lit blue-white the station's phone. His own phone had been stubborn about service. The little bars went up and down like a child's drawing of the sea. He pulled into a lot by a diner that was proud of its pie and used the payphone by the wall the way a person uses a folkloric tool unsure it would work, surprised when it did. He called the station. The line rang 4 times, then clicked to a breath and a voice. Older. Calm. Street Heron 7. Evening, Elias said. I'm sorry for the hour. I'm a driver on the levee. I found a dog. Collar says Bud, River 7. Says to call the station. A gentle sound came down the line, pleased surprise, not startle. You have you? He's getting good at finding rides. Elias looked at the dog through the glass. Bud had his chin on the seat back now, eyes heavy with a look a person makes when a warm room and an old story have caught up and insisted on being heard. He was at the boat ramp, Elias said. Didn't seem lost. Seemed like he knew where he was going. That's as true as it needs to be, said the voice, and it smiled without making the sound. He used to live at the station. He would take and keep company on bad nights. Not every night. Just when the river leaned on the road more than his kind. You on a delivery? I am. Keep him with you until you pass Lockham Cut, if you don't mind. There's a little water over the low there when the gates let, and folks who aren't expecting it do the wrong math. He'll tell you when he's ready to get out. If you're comfortable, pull off at the old ferry staging. He knows the smell of the place. If you can't, don't worry. He finds his way back to us in his own way. We'll leave the porch light. Is this you saying what I think you're saying? Elias asked, not quite being unkind. I don't mind if it is. I just want to keep him safe. That's a good habit, the voice said. You too. Keep him, keep yourself, keep the white line. Thank you for calling. Elias hung up with the slow neatness of a person who doesn't want to call attention to doing it. He bought a coffee because he felt he should offer the world the small courtesy of paying for someone's overhead if he was borrowing their light. And he took a bottled water with him that said local spring on the label, even though everyone knew the springs up here were mostly stories told at picnics. Back in the truck, he opened the bottle and set it on the floorboard by the passenger seat. Bud did not drink. He looked at the bottle with mild interest, and then at Elias and then at the road. Right, said Elias, and put them both back on the move. Lockham Cut arrived, just like the voice had promised. The levee dipped where a channel cut through toward cane fields and the river's drier cousins. The pavement wore a gloss that wasn't paint. Water made itself thin across the lane, less than an inch, just enough to make a man doing 40 feel the hand of the river ask for respect. Bud stood, back paws planted, front paws on the edge of the seat, as if somebody in his long life had first told him it was fine to do that at exactly this kind of minute. Elias kept it steady, eyes soft, hands easy on the wheel with a weight that said he intended to keep the truck in the middle of good sense. The water ran by in fine sheets, almost invisible. The river was probably half asleep while it did it, a habit. Beyond the cut, a set of big sycamores stood like old, careful police with their white arms going up into the dark. The old ferry staging the voice had mentioned was a flat shoulder, where the road widened into the ghost of a lot. Ferries didn't run here anymore. The river had found other places to prefer. But the place where cars had once queued had the look of patient ground. A low rail separated gravel from a drop down to a lawn of water. A simple concrete blockhouse that had been a ticket window in another day stubbornly held a stack of flyers about catfish tournaments in its window-like time, had stopped between one weekend and the next. Elias took the turn with signal and care. He let the truck idle where the gravel had been tamped by old weight. His hazards clicked like a metronome that had a good ear. The dog hopped to the floor, then to the step, then down. It landed light. It turned toward the water like a person going to meet a friend who had promised to be at a particular corner. It didn't go far. It stood with its head low and its tail making a little motion that didn't mean dog joy so much as dog considering. Thank you, Elias said, because it seemed silly not to say it even if it went only to the night. He unscrewed the water, poured a little in his hand, and let the small amount fall onto the packed gravel. Bud watched the water darken the dust and made a decision that only he understood. He stepped into the low reeds, slipped between two, and was not there. Elias did not chase. He felt a part of himself stand up in his chest with a surprised question, then sit back down. He got in the truck. He watched his mirror like he might see a small canine head appear in the beam. He did not. He flipped off the hazards and let the rig down off the gravel and back onto the thin levee road. The river run after that behaved itself. The taillights he had been pacing were gone. The sky had folded into a few cleaner stars, the kind that show through a cloud when the cloud gets tired of being a cloud and decides to be nothing for a minute. A train far away worked a slow chord. The reefer hummed the soft bass line of cargo that is content with its climate. A billboard with a catfish the size of a canoe grinned down at nobody in particular from a lot that would be muddy by morning. At the distribution center on the inland side, he checked in with a guard whose night had the same tempo as the river's. The dock lamp glowed a mild yellow over the bumpers. A forklift talked to itself, backwards beep in the distance. He signed where he was meant to sign, and did not bring a dog into the conversation. because there was nothing about the dog that needed to be on paper. When the pallets were off, when the wall clock in the office told a time that matched his ELD in a way that made him feel normal again, when he had rolled back to the levee and pointed south, he looked for the ferry stage out of the corner of his eye. The blockhouse window had a different flyer in it, as if someone had come by and straightened things while he wasn't looking. The rail kept being a rail. The sycamores kept holding their careful arms up to the sky. He did not see a dog. He drove home on his lane and let the engine know he appreciated it. A week later, on a day run that ended near Street Heron, he made a point of swinging past the station with the blue-white numbers over the door. The bay doors were open. A truck sat inside with its doors ajar, washing its own smell out into the daylight. A person in a t-shirt that had seen every summer in the county looked up and read his request without asking him to elaborate. "You, the driver, found Bud?" she asked, straightforward. "I think he found me," he said. He smiled in the only place on his face that admits to smiles. "Is he?" "He's around," she said. She let the word do a lot of work. She led him to a bulletin board inside that had weather warnings and potluck schedules, and a notice about a CPR class. In the corner was a photo that had been printed and printed again until the whites were a little gray, the blacks a little friendly. A shepherd lab sort with a blue collar sat on the bumper of a rescue truck, head canted, wearing a bright orange vest in a size someone who loved him had thought too funny not to take a picture of. "Bud," said the vest in block letters like any volunteer. Next to it, another photo older showed a flood year, knee-deep in the bay, people in tall boots, a radio held above water, the dog swimming between elbows like it had all been his idea. "He rode sometimes," the woman said. "Back when we had a rash of folks thinking the levee was a suggestion instead of a road, he'd fuss at bad places. People listen better when something that can't talk is making a point." She pinned a new notice about a pancake breakfast over an old one that had a date crossed out. "He doesn't bother with folks who don't need him. He doesn't ask much from the ones who do. He gets himself home, always has." Elias nodded. He thought of the way the dog's ears had flattened for the unknown object in the road. He thought of the steady stand over the slick of water, the paws planted like a promise. "If he finds me again," he said, "I'll do the same." "That'll be fine," she said, as if cooperative relationships with river dogs were a normal part of a county's life. "Take a bottle of water on your way out, will you? We like to have them move." He did. He left $20 in the donation boot beside the board, because it seemed like a decent trade for explanations given with that kind of ease. The boot was scuffed by years of feet going into different kinds of fires. The bill slid down and sat with the others like a leaf in a jar. On the door out, a hand-painted sign read, "Leave a light." It meant something different if you had stood on the levee at night. He saw Bud again twice more that month. Once at the same boat ramp, the dog waiting with his front feet on the step like a person who had learned to ask and ask again politely. Once at a narrow bridge where cane grew to the very edge of the concrete and water, had the habit of kissing the tires of vehicles that didn't know to be humble. Each time, the routine fit, as if it had been made for both of them. Door, step, seat. A pause at a place where water was, where roads forgot it would be. A goodbye in the language of pause, stepping down and disappearing into reeds like someone leaving a room without closing the door too loudly. He mentioned none of it to dispatch, not out of fear that it would sound foolish it would, but because it felt the way some things do. A local geology. You don't tell the northern office about how long it takes a cypress to turn its leaves. They have their own trees. He mentioned it to one person at one counter, in one diner. A woman who put plates down like she was setting records on a turntable. She said, "Bud?" like she was greeting a neighbor, and pointed at a jar by the register, with a sticker on it that said Bud's Bow. He put $1 in there too, because it was rude not to. Storm season came on. The river rose the way good rivers do, slow and dignified, taking pieces of bank back in neat mouthfuls. Signs went up at the low spots, not big ones, just the kind that tell you someone has counted the water with a stick every day and decided. Elias carried on. Some nights, he drove with only crickets for company, and the white line like a thread he had been trusted to pull. Some nights, he saw the flick of blue on a collar in his headlight, and made room in the cab for a passenger who knew what mattered. He noticed that when Bud was there, a peculiar calm lay over the ELD and the dash. Clocks agreed. The lightweight little arguments electronics have with one another went away. The road itself felt like a thing made for people, briefly, instead of a compromise between river and plan. He knew better than to assign meaning. He let it be generous. Once, one time only, when he rolled past the old ferry staging after daylight, he saw a small figure on the low rail and thought, for a ridiculous second, that he'd catch the dog sunning himself like a seal. It was a tabby cat, the kind that belongs to nobody and knows everybody, tail curled around its feet. It looked at the highway like a person reading a book, and then blinked long and slow. He laughed with his mouth closed so the river wouldn't hear the noise and take offense. On the last night he ran before a week off, the levee was glass, and the stars were a swarm in the one clear part of sky. The clouds had decided to leave alone. He didn't see Bud at the ramp. He didn't see him at the cut. He drove with 2 windows cracked, and the road giving back only the most necessary sounds. At mile 48, a sign that had been straight last week leaned just enough to make a careful person trim their course. He touched the wheel and trimmed. Ahead, a thin line of wet lay across both lanes. Fresh, not enough to drip, enough to shine if you give your light the right angle. He set his hands like a man picking up a glass with water to the very top. The truck did what it was built to do. The line went away behind him, replaced by 1 more minute of night. He didn't need company then. He needed only the memory of company. The levee went on, patient. The river said nothing. A porch light on the far bank burned by habit behind a live oak, a polite star, a small sign set by a person for the sake of any traveler who didn't want to miss the corner of their own turn. Back in the cab, on the passenger seat, under Bud's collar impression in the jacket, the star-shaped tag he had read that first night knocked gently against the clipboard when he took a curve. It shouldn't have been there. He picked it up with 2 fingers and turned it over, terms of a job etched into cheap metal. Bud. River 7. If found, call. He set it on the dash, a small glinting thing no bigger than a cookie from a diner bowl and as serious as a rulebook. In the morning, when he passed the station to leave it, door open polite, nobody made a big deal of it. The same woman who had shown him the board took it like a person takes a friend's hat. He'll pick up another, she said, dry and practical. He leaves them like breadcrumbs. It lets folks talk to each other. On the way out, a man in a cap with the station's number leaned on the doorway and watched the river as if he expected it to perform a trick. You keep the line? He asked without looking right at Elias. I did, Elias said. Then you did it right, the man said. He tapped the brim like a polite punctuation mark. Leave a light. The river run took him out of the county like a ribbon pulled through fingers. He kept his lane. He kept the windows cracked when the road asked it. He learned what the river looked like when it had something on its mind, and what a dog looked like when it meant to talk without making sound. The route stayed itself. The road did not promise anything it could not deliver. When the night grew long, and the levee thin, and the crickets decided to be quiet all at once for no good reason, and come back a minute later altogether, he would think of a blue collar at the edge of his vision, and feel, for an odd, steady second, that he had a passenger again. He would check his mirror not for taillights, but out of respect for whatever rides alongside people in places where water and road shake hands and agree, for a few careful miles, to hold steady. As the rumble of the road fades and the night grows still, remember, some stories don't end when the engine stops. Out there, beyond the reach of the headlights, the echoes of what we've heard still travel those same haunted miles. If you've made it to the end, you're one of the few who can face the dark without looking away. Don't forget to like this video, share your city and the time you're listening in the comments, and subscribe to The Sleep Haunt, where the road never rests, and neither do the stories. Sleep well, if you can.